Hello, and welcome to another episode of Technically Speaking. I'm your host, Megan, and as always, I'm with John. And today we have a special guest, Jason. Welcome.
Hello.
Just to begin, could you tell us and the audience about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jason Melton. Currently, I am the Director of Operations and Chief of Staff for Genesis's channel and partner strategy organization. I'm originally from Indiana. I currently live in Central Ohio, a proud Ball State University grad. David Letterman, and our thing now apparently is Chirp Chirp. I did my undergraduate at Ball State, graduate degree in information and communication sciences. I was a full time contract faculty member for a few years, did an MBA, and then I went to IBM where I sold the information management brand for 5 years across the Great Lakes region. Thought I was going to go be a college professor, went back to Ball State for a year before I got into the call center software industry. Did that for a few years before I went to a company in Indianapolis called Interactive Intelligence. So this is around 2014. And in 2017, they were acquired by Genesis. In 2017, I left Genesis and I went to my first startup. It was a mobile app for college students. I just loved college so much. I wanted to serve that space. So we sold that company in 6 months. And then I did some other startup stuff. And those of you in Central Ohio may remember the Smart City Initiative. I participated in the Smart City Accelerator Program, working on some job creation and workforce development initiatives. And then I went to Microsoft for almost 3 years, where I did digital transformation and state local government education. Along came COVID, and working at the intersection of government and education, I found myself on phone calls with state and university leaders asking how do we move mobile rapidly, and how do we help and underemployed individuals get jobs. In that moment, it really became a game changer. I left Microsoft and went back to another startup that was another higher education mobile experience. Did that for a few years, and then returned to Genesis to help them with some large enterprise strategic initiatives.
That's awesome. I love Smart City. I love that they're still around. Like that was one of those. It's like what's going to happen when the grant money runs out. For those that aren't familiar, Columbus and Smart Cities was able to win a federal. I think it was transportation, Department of Transportation grant to really figure out how to I hate to say wire the city, but how to look at what tech is coming down the path and how do we utilize it. And they put together a rock star team. So I'm glad to hear that they're still going. Glad to see that you were a part of it.
Yeah, and honestly, I think a lot of people are still asking, what can we do? What are we capable of? I mean, we all know about the Silicon Heartland Initiative. We've got Intel coming here. We're building data centers for Facebook and Google as quick as humanly possible. Between the Midwest is really having an interesting time. There's a lot of money. Ratmir Timashev gave $100 million to Ohio State University for Center for Something Excellence that is really intended to spit out a pipeline of innovation in Central Ohio. So that first startup I went to was actually out of a boutique startup firm out of Indianapolis. So I think that the world is realizing that once you can do things quickly remotely, you can innovate from anywhere. There's lower cost of living. And as long as you can have access to the resources, the last barrier is probably the level of capital and trust in an ecosystem that, the East Coast and West Coast still enjoy.
And I think we in Central Ohio, really Ohio in general as well, are closing that gap quite a bit. I don't know the specifics, but I saw a new fund, an Ohio fund with a lot of the big players from Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincy. I think they announced it last week. I know Mark Kwame is one of the folks, as well as a couple folks from Cincy and Cleveland, whose names I've recognized. So the capital that they invested a decade ago has obviously paid off very well. And I'm glad to see that people are redeploying capital, as well as, kind of Central Ohio. We'll talk more later, but, the startup ecosystem is starting to have some dividends returned as there's been some pretty nice exits.
All right, so kind of cycling back, obviously you have a lot of experience in different companies and with startups, but could you tell us a little bit more about your current role at Genesis and what your typical day looks like for you?
Oh boy. So I returned to Genesis a year ago. Genesis so they in the call center industry, the customer experience journey, right? And what we're really focused on is AI powered journey orchestration, right? And so I'll be honest, when I had the opportunity to return to Genesis, it was partially because they were positioning themselves as a customer journey experience platform. And having done a lot of customer journey work over the last several years in an attempt to squeeze as much friction as possible out of that work, I sort of wanted to pull back the covers and be here at a moment to be called baloney on it, right? And I've been wildly impressed with what it is they're doing, the technologies they're leveraging to really achieve what they're espousing as their vision. So when I came back, they had just announced end of life for two of their legacy platforms, one cloud, one prem. They have since announced end of life for their second second set of platforms, one cloud, one prem, with the goal to get everybody on the new Genesis Cloud platform. They are all in on the cloud and they are all in on AI. And you'll see that represented with some of the strategic partnerships they've announced over the last couple of years with ServiceNow and Salesforce. So for the last year, day in, day out, my job was to say, okay, how do we make it as easy as possible for the Genesis organization to have conversations with customers about the value of moving to the new Genesis Cloud? And how do we make it as easy as possible for everybody to accomplish that? How do we reduce the friction along that journey? We accomplished, or we at least got the whole program moving in the right direction. I guess I'd like to think that we got there in an accelerated fashion because Genesis said we no longer need a standalone team to focus on this, and we worked on baking that into the enterprise so that all the operationalization and all the teamwork and everything that we had stood up, I went in there saying I want to put myself out of a job as quickly as possible. If I do this right, the tools will be there, the governance will be there, and the people that are responsible for this along the journey will be able to do their job successfully. And this will just happen as a normal course of business with our relationships with our customers. A couple of months ago, and if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I just corrected this today, my organization, my VP and myself, they tasked him with coming in and rethinking our channel and partner organization in totality. So rethinking our strategic partnerships, rethinking our value-added reseller of our partnerships, all of the partnerships right now are being evaluated for where Genesis wants to be in 3 to 5 years, not, and so we're in the process as we talk right now. So right now is a kickoff with lots of work streams. He's asked me to be his chief of staff. So I'm really making sure that a lot of the trains are getting on the right track. He spends a lot of his time with our senior leadership team and developing the overall strategy and working with the strategy pieces within Genesis to say, okay, what are the very specific metrics we want to hit along this journey. And so right now is really a fascinating time because it's like being back in a startup. I tell them every day, I'm like, for an enterprise, there's a lot of startup activity. We're, evaluating, do we have the right processes, tools, et cetera, to be successful in a large organizational transformational change? Who are we partnering with across the enterprise in order to make this successful? I was just working on a stakeholder analysis today. So day in, day out, a lot of my day is focused on, and I've been tasked with thinking through every process across our channel organization and saying, what can be automated? How can we leverage advanced tool sets? We're running a large enterprise AI. I'm not going to say which product, but one of the platforms for similar to Chat GPT, et cetera, to see what mileage we can get and value we can get out of tools like that. So it's really an exciting time. I'll give this organization a lot of credit for being innovative, being open to change. Anybody at any level can have an idea and suggest, here's how we might do something better and propose that. And they're working very hard to enable everybody in the organization to understand how those kinds of proposals need to go up. Right. So you need to have a clear problem statement and, what does the process look like today? What should it look like? What's the associated budget? Who do I need in order to make it successful and so on? So day in, day out, that's right now what a lot of my efforts are spent on.
There's so many ways to take this, but I'm going to start with the one that is, to me, it's very intriguing. Is you said that you still have a product that's on-prem. And so you guys are trying to convert some folks that are still on-prem in 2024 to a cloud solution. That might be hard, right? Because if they're still using on-prem applications, that's a transition that they haven't been willing to make the jump yet. So what kind of struggles have you guys had there? Or what have you encountered?
I mean, yeah, you guys do digital transformation work as well, right? And so that a lot of folks are still, they want to make the leap. And most of the time, it's usually there's somebody inside the organization that has what I like to call a legacy bias, right? I struggle to find tangible, physical, technical reasons not to make those kinds of changes. Now that excludes the federal government entirely. That's a separate bear that has their own set of problems. But by and large, most enterprises. So when I worked at IBM 2005 to 2010, I remember my first large global company that said, we are an X company, given the industry they were in, whatever their business vertical was. We are not a technology company. Now, I know the argument about every company is a technology company, and I agree with that. In this instance, they said, we want as much as possible to be in the cloud. And this is before the cloud was the cloud, right? I mean, this was still, they were probably going to have their own chunk of a dedicated data center, which is sort of what the cloud is anyway. So what we are helping do, and that was part of what I had to frame up when I came into work on the customer experience evolution program, was we had a hypothesis that the overwhelming majority, and this proved out true time and time again, of these customers were looking for a value lever to motivate the rest of their organization to get to the cloud. They, CIOs are wanting to get there, the overwhelming majority of them. I look at almost everything in the world through a standard deviation bell curve. And, you've always got your innovators on one end and you've got your laggards on the other. And everybody in the middle is somewhere along that journey. And you can just slice it up in pretty standard deviations of, your laggards here. Generally, there's always somebody inside the organization that is like, we need to get to the cloud. That's what the future is. It is a different expenditure bucket. But aside from that, so yeah, we've got a lot of people that I think there's pent up demand for this move. The CXE program, by and large, was fairly easy. It was just always, the last couple of customers, most of them government entities, frankly, that were really struggling to figure out how to be successful in the time frames that we were trying to achieve.
And we could definitely have a whole conversation on the government cloud and what's happening, and we'll save that for another day. You
sure.
Also
I'm not an expert in that, so that's beyond.
I know enough to be dangerous and
right. FedRAMP, right? I mean, that's about as much as I know.
We're a 8A, and so we've done some dipping our toes into government contracting, and then we quickly pulled our toe out. As like, do we really want to play with those sharks? We're still So you also touched on something that's near and dear to my heart. I think, it sounds like you guys at Genesys have a great company culture of collaboration, sharing, and almost, you said it felt like a startup with inside that enterprise. And that is something that I think all enterprises say they want. And I'm hearing from you that you guys have achieved it. Any secrets or thoughts as to what, what's different between, like, when you hear the bigwigs say we're going to be a startup and we're going to move fast, but then you realize that, large enterprises here in Columbus never move fast.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I'll give you 3 examples. One, when I worked at IBM, they said that, and watching that ship, it's still trying to turn, right? They missed some opportunities cloud in the world that they're trying to recover from. Microsoft. So when I was at IBM, Microsoft was started in 1980, 1985. So when I was competing against them in 2005, 2000, they were only a 20-year-old company. They were still, to a degree, sort of a startup, right? They matured significantly, but I watched Microsoft trying very hard not to lose that startup core culture. And then I've worked at startups that can turn nimbly and are jealous that they don't have the resources of the Microsofts and IBM. I will say it's one, it starts at the top. It is, my opinion is, that is the biggest influence, right? Whatever you want the culture to be. I had dinner with a university president not too long ago, and he was bemoaning how students are down on their phones and how do we get them to look up. And I said, well, first of all, you never know what these students are doing. They might be working adults. They might have kids and families and other things trying to handle. So let's not, get too hung up on that. I said, second, how do you and your leadership team look when you walk around campus? Are you down on your phones, or are your phones in your pockets and you're talking to people? Like, let's start with leadership at the top. And I give Genesys a tremendous amount of credit for really creating space for innovative ideas. And it's a balance. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day. If you give people too much space, they run amok. They're, shopping on Amazon all day, right? And if you're too rigid, then you don't get the divergent thinking that everybody, the reason we have diverse desires is because people have different lived experiences that they can bring in. So it's balance. And I think balance adherence from a governance perspective, that's the responsibility starting at first line managers, right? They should be enabled and empowered to coach and recognize when Jason has an idea. Just because Jason thinks it's a good idea, that doesn't mean everybody should or will listen to me. And managers should be the experts in how to shepherd an idea. That's what startups are all about. It's about tiny experiments and innovation. And most of the time, those ideas are suppressed, or people, like I just had a call today. We have an MBA intern at Genesis, and I was talking to him. The dude's worked at BCG before, right? I mean, he knows consulting, and we all know that those companies have rigid adherence to discipline practice, right? And so I said, bring some of that up. Right now, Genesis is never going to be a rigid discipline company, but there is absolutely room for improvement on how every team performs. And so, to me, that's what Genesis is, finding that balance. You've got a high energy, spirited CEO. The leaders that I've worked with across all parts of the organization all have, I don't know when they sleep, and they appear to run on coffee. It's really incredible, but they lead by example, and they create space at every turn for people's voices and ideas to be heard. But they hold the balance on, I can't have a tsunami of ideas. And I think they manage that through the layers, like with stage gates and such. So it's pretty cool.
I know we've talked a lot about startups, so Jason, could you just tell us what challenges you have seen with getting these startups off the ground?
Yeah. So I think there's a gets back to this misconception. So this is a broad thesis Jason has, that in the world, we now think that because I have an idea, everybody should listen to it. And I was the most guilty of this for the longest time. I joke with my wife. I used to show up after being at the bar with my friends, and I had the next greatest idea, and I'd be like, "This is so great," and she had to learn, give it 2 days, and I'll forget it, move on. My experience is similar to corporate innovation with startups. There is a science to it, right? How well do you understand your idea? Do you have it in a very concise, documented format that allows you to build consensus around the validity of your idea? Here are the last interesting pieces, and it's, do you have a reliable messenger? Somebody that has lived this experience, that the world will believe, if Jason is the la-di-da in a particular area, people trust. As a matter of fact, somebody put my picture on a slide deck, and I worked with them for a few months, and then they got funded. And I still contend that's because I am recognized to a degree in my industry as somebody with some credibility. The next thing is a budget. I think too often people think they have to have a full blown 10-year P&L budget, when no, when people are making investments, they make them incrementally. I'm sure in your digital transformation work, that's part of your fiscal strategy is, hey, what will it take to get the thing started? How much capital, what resources, what is the team that we need, the leanest team possible to test and validate this idea? And that's something that I heard in one of these sessions for somebody that came from the Bay to Columbus, talked about, the 10-year 10X strategy. The first 2 years are simply product market fit. And then you need to double your revenue. So you're up to whatever it was, $100 million or something after 10 years. I forget the exact math on the thing, but essentially that was a huge eye opening. And as I've gone through the startup, I still coach startups today, a handful of them, and that's usually the thing I have to really. And honestly, I had it beaten into me by my mentor, like to the point where we were almost in a mild shouting match. It was me shouting out of frustration. He was still very calm, but he's retired executive, done a lot of startup and philanthropic fundraising, and I just couldn't get it in my head that I needed less. Like, I was trying to, oh God, I need this really detailed, granular plan. No, Jason, you need to show how you're going to be successful with a small amount of capital and the right team. What's the leanest way to validate that your idea is good? And that to me is the biggest struggle with startups is, I think, well, and I should say most of this is around the technology startup. There's a whole separate conversation to be had for, if you want to sell apples or shoes or coffee mugs or whatever, right? Because that, you can sort of get a product out and do product market fit that way. But to me, that's the biggest challenge with getting a startup off the ground is the discipline to get customer one. And do I even need money to do that? The one startup I coached, I said, what is stopping you from getting your first paying customer? Like, you're building your website, you've got a V2 mom, you're trying to do organizational strategy and all this stuff. Go get a customer. Just stop whatever you're doing and go get a paying customer. And they did. They got one, then they got two, then they created a partnership, and now they're going to have 6 sponsored clients. So it's that sort of stuff.
And what's great is, and I hope you validate this, because one of my theses is you have an idea and you think you know what you want to build, but your first customer is going to tell you what the market wants. And then your second customer is going to tell you something probably close, but maybe a little bit different. And then from a tech standpoint, it gets to be, how do you figure out what the most important thing is to iterate to, and kind of direction? Any thoughts on sort of how to handle like product backlog from a SaaS standpoint? I know you've got some SaaS experience.
Yeah, so I worked with a state agency to build a no wrong door innovation pipeline, sort of the same concept that Genesis does pretty well, where if anybody has an idea, how do you get that into a process? So, there's lots of methodologies for this. First, write it down. How are you going to document, validate? Then you can vote, right? I like the systems that have the thumbs up. And then when, something gets enough votes, then it starts to get a little bit more traction. Um, so handling product backlog, it just depends on how much backlog you have, right? You can throw resources at it to a degree. So one of the work streams we're working on right now, I was just going through today how we needed some columns for the what's the quadrant, the efforts return
Yeah, I call it
quadrant,
the
right? When you
magic four, the 4 box or the 9 box, depending on how many quadrants you want. Well, quadrants, how
Exactly.
many little
If you
boxes.
get that top right quadrant
Yeah,
of,
beautiful.
high, low cost, high return, yeah, then there's your priority list. So that was another thing that I've been trying to bring up a lot lately is just, so I was on a call yesterday where I'm like, okay, you listed a bunch of things. Like, are any of those what we need, right? Or are we off in ideation land with what we could or should do? So to me, it's all about prioritization. That just gets back to organizational discipline and putting operationalization and governance around those things. I think are often lacking until it's too late, and then everything's a mess and it's a fire drill, and somebody's complaining that we've got a big backlog with no priorities.
What are your thoughts on sort of some of the like low code, no code solutions that are coming out and allowing companies, both large and small, to iterate and find that product market fit faster or fail faster and move on to the next idea?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on the fail fast. I'm a learn fast guy, right? Like I try to get the negative connotation out of it. Yeah. You know, I, I mean, I'm all for exactly that. How do we test as quickly as possible? And the my experience has been so in this enterprise AI tool, I think people confuse the terms enablement and training. And so it depends on what who are you expecting to do that? Are you expecting self-developer iteration? Are you expecting like that was Microsoft's thesis in Hit Refresh? Satya Nadella lays out, that it's a gosh, what did he call it? The citizen developer that everybody should be able. So to your point, low code, no code. If I, Jason, see a problem, can I code up something and show somebody and test and validate? And I think there's a gap there. I don't think that organizations generally do enough or the right or good enough, or then they post short videos about how to do things and people don't consume them. And this is an adoption and change management and an enablement and training issue. So I think a lot of organizations overestimate if we give everybody these tools the consumption of those tools. That's my number one question. Like I did a project with a university when I was at Microsoft, and day one they were laying all this stuff out, and it took about 2 days. I go, you don't have a technology problem, you have an adoption problem. Like you've got great tech, it works, it's beautiful, but you've got poor adoption because you unloaded an app with no strategy because you assumed that everybody in college would download and consume your app, and you gave them every available feature with no gamification. And so that's where I think if you create a tight enough box and you did a hackathon with easy tools, but you're probably going to need for a 1 hour hackathon, you might need 6 months of training and enablement. You need to give people some practice reps to get comfortable with the tool and not expect everybody. If the expectation of the organization is that a handful of people will develop or code something, then good, roll them out, and that's your experiment. But if you sort of are doing an enterprise buy-in and saying everybody in our company is expected to engineer their ideas, I think unless you have a heavy support change and enablement adoption change management program, you're going to struggle.
This kind of leads me down another little rabbit hole, both from an enterprise and a startup perspective. I'm interested in the build versus buy and where you kind of fall in that. Obviously things can be done internally, or you can go out and find a solution off the shelf to kind of add into your tech stack. I'd love to hear your thoughts on both from an enterprise perspective as well as a startup perspective, assuming the startup is a SaaS tech led heavy developer.
It's about the value of what you're building versus buying, the time frame, and the skill set. If I will always err on the side of what, like, even if it's just a wireframe, right, to build that consensus and buy-in. When you look at large merger and acquisition, they may not even. So I know of companies that have been purchased to buy the customer base and they shelf the product. We see it all the time, right? So, sometimes people aren't even buying a product, right? So I always start from a place of how do we write it down? How do we validate it? And then figure out from there through some validation stage gates, right? So, that's where I think a lot of organizations could use some help, is really accelerating your point about the backlog of stuff. Like, what is the organization you're working with better at? Are they better at building, or are they better at innovating? The work I did at Microsoft, when I went there, I thought everybody in the world wanted to listen to Microsoft's voice about digital transformation. And what I learned, it took me almost 18 months and a couple of frustrating projects to learn that most of the time, most large enterprises are still listening to Deloitte, Accenture, BCG, et cetera, right? That these organizations have digital transformation practices. Once I learned that and I went to one of those for a particular customer, and this guy said, this is the perfect partnership. We don't innovate with the core technology as well. That organization, that university is a Microsoft shop. We own their DT journey. We want to partner with you to do quick reps on innovation and ideation. And that became a great partnership because you could sit in a meeting, they could say, hey, we think we want to do whatever. Okay, we mock it up rapidly, turn it into, you try to use a power app or some low code, no code kind of thing to validate, is it going to work? Does it really work the way we think it will? So that's really how, we've worked through some of that stuff. No.
So I did want to ask, because I know we talked a little bit about this earlier. You're from Columbus, that's where you are. We're in
Yeah.
Columbus. So
Yeah.
how important would you say community involvement is for fostering innovation and growth?
I one year I went to an alumni dinner for my first graduate program, and I said in that, they were like, "Well, Jason, you seem you're doing pretty well. Like, what have you been doing since graduation?" I said, "You're only as strong as your network." And one of the things that somebody that came out from the Bay Area to Columbus said at one of these sessions around town was, in the Bay, when somebody has an idea, they post it on Slack and developers try it immediately. And like you were saying, John, you'll get very quick feedback. This sucks. Oh, this is great. I can use it. And it'll spread virally. That's how that community works. And so then, I also went, do you guys know who Russell Simmons is? Right? Music producer, Def Jam. He came and spoke at Ohio State years ago. And he at the time he was talking about meditation and focus and that sort of stuff. And then as soon as they said any questions, and the first guy jumped up and was like, Russell, I put my demo album back there. Like, I'd love it if you check it out. And he's like, okay, I think. And then somebody else said, oh, like, I'm a fashion designer, I'm a rapper, whatever. And after about 5 of those, wasn't about his book at all. He goes, look, if you're hot, we'll find you. Right. And that's where, I think we probably know some names. You mentioned Kwame, right? We know the people in the community that are doing this stuff, and they're hungry for more involvement, engagement, and community. And I've been particularly interested in all the like Tech Elevator and some of the other skilling programs around town. That we mentioned, the Center for Software Innovation at Ohio State, right? And TechStars is in town. So the community is shaping, and it's fascinating when you flood a community with capital. The first, I don't know. I'm always torn. Like, with too much capital, you just get a lot of stuff coming through to get the capital. With no capital, which we've had for a long time, or limited capital, you get grittier, stickier kind of. I don't know which is good or bad, but Ohio X is doing an insanely good job of really canvassing the state and bringing incredibly high level stakeholders and visibility statewide to a lot of this. So, I can't understate or overstate. Anyway, community is a huge portion of this. I should have worn my Built in Ohio shirt. I wear it to most conversations like this
We'll have to.
because it's an exciting time to be here.
We'll Photoshop it over for you somehow.
Okay, awesome, good. Well, at least this is blue. It'll sort of look like it.
No, I 100% agree. And, I came from Fortune 100 companies before I got into the startup-y world. And when I finally kind of made that transition here in Columbus, I just loved tech life. I loved the community that was being built. This was, decade plus ago.
Yeah.
And watching it foster and grow, and watching the Cover My Meds, grow from nothing to billion-dollar exits, and then, obviously multiple billion-dollar exits since then for other startups, has been totally just fun to watch. And I love seeing some of them deploy their capital again. Now that they've got their big exits, they haven't forgot about us. They didn't move to Hawaii, and they're
Yeah.
working to continue to grow.
I'll put it
Again,
back in.
we've talked about Tech Life a few times. I'll keep bragging about them, but you also mentioned TechStars and some of the work that they're doing within Ohio State. I think that is going to be the biggest catalyst for change, is the sort of focus on, getting, because we talked to a startup that was from New York, and she moved to Columbus for the program, so we're stealing, pretty good ideas and getting them here and getting them
Yeah.
to
Was she
build with,
a New York resident, that like a longtime New
yeah.
Yorker that came to the Midwest?
I don't know if I remember if she was there for a long time, but she moved from New York for TechStars for that. She
Okay.
was a part of the first cohort, which I think just finished up, and I think they're about to start cohort 2
Yeah.
in this August 2024. I think it's cohort 2 starting.
Yeah.
And they built a solid team. They're taking the capital that was given by an entrepreneur who built a very successful business here in Central Ohio and said, "Here's my thank you," a very large
Yeah.
donation to Ohio State. And I've always thought Ohio State had untapped talent. I did go there for graduate school, so I'm biased.
Okay.
But I feel like that they've always had a really strong program. Dr. Michael Camp ran it back when I was there, and I know it's transitioned to a few people to really help educate, just as you've educated our listeners, on a lot of the important steps in the startup entrepreneur journey, and making sure you document, make sure you find your right customers, make sure you're ready to iterate, and then also
The science side of it. Yeah, there's a process to this stuff. And I talked with their entrepreneurship program not too long ago, and they had run a survey, and like 15,000 students or something raised their hand as having some sort of idea. Like, that is a large pipeline management problem that most universities, they know the ideas. Everybody has an idea. Like, I don't want to say everybody. Lots and lots of people have ideas, and that they don't know what to do with. That's one of the startups I coach is called the Excellence Factory. And that's their whole model. It's a subscription based model that if you have an idea and you want to pay somebody sort of like a personal trainer to help, okay, and they can connect you with resources, be it marketing or financial or legal or whatever you might need. And, you meet with them once a week for an hour, and they've got a structured process, and they've worked with Rev One. And, there are lots of models. It's just an exciting time. If you zoom out on it and you sort of look at the pieces of the puzzle coming together in the Midwest, it's just an exciting, you're absolutely right. And if you've been around it for a long time, to see how it's changed, it's fun to reflect and think about that too.
And back to Ohio State, I love that they put on that Hack Ohio. I think I'm getting the name correct, but they have really
Yeah.
leaned into the entrepreneurship journey, knowing that this next generation is willing to take that risk more so than, I think our generation did a pretty good job of taking risk, but I've got a couple of friends that are 2-3 years out of college. They've already been a part of 2 exits, or they're 5 years out of
Wow.
college, been a part of 2 exits, and now he's founding his own company. And it's just amazing to hear his story. He's brilliant, which is why he's successful, which also helps.
Well, and I think those tools are getting easier. To your point about low code, no code, I think the tools are getting easier. I think they are getting more broadly consumed. I think, there are multiple tools, right? I mean, it used to just be Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, right? And now, I mean, there's a bazillion different tools. So I just took the time to learn how to use them. I mean, I've read some books lately on The Art of Impossible is a great one. Walking through like finding the intersection of your purpose and your passion, and areas to explore, and recommending finding 2 areas that you have interest in. And then at the intersection of those 2 areas is an area to dive in deeper and say, okay, am I excited about this? And the book Range talks about a sampling period and how, you can try a couple of different things. So, that's the work I do in my coaching and mentoring for college students is I always say, like, I don't care what you're studying. What are you passionate about? What blows your hair back? What do you really want to do? And I start from a place of, okay, so, most of the time I can say movies, music, television, most are sports. Usually it's going to be sports. I'll be like, okay, so you're probably not going to be a professional tennis player at this point. Tell me something else you really like, right? Like, what is it you like about tennis? And then we'll go down that path. And so that's where I think a lot of people are feeling more empowered because they see opportunity. They see other people living out, fun, exciting journeys. And that's, a path they want to explore.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We have actually come toward the end. Want to kind of hand it over to you. Is there anything you would like to kind of throw out to the viewers? Any last thoughts before I close it out?
I mean, only the last thing we were talking about, right? This idea of, trying to find, if you're not already working at a space, if you're not serving a space that you're excited and passionate about, even at Genesis, my boss gives me room to still go poke around in the higher education, how to help people get jobs, the state and local government space. So I'm fortunate in that area, but, it's important, I think, for people to say like, okay, well, maybe if, I'm excited about food and I'm excited about a faith-based community. Where is the intersection of those two things? And, experiment in there. And then from a tech standpoint, technology is only a tool to scale things that work. If you throw technology at a broken process, you'll just have a growing broken process. And so it's really about, here's an idea and here's an idea, and how do I bring those together, and who else is doing in that area, and how do I serve that space better than anybody else? And like we were talking about, if you get 1, 2, 3, 4 customers, you get that feedback. Now you're on to a conversation about how would I apply technology to this so that I can help and serve more people. So that's really my sort of challenge, and the thing I'm most excited about in life is helping people explore those pathways.
Well, I am going to end with one last question that I forgot. I like to ask one last question, which is I want you to make a bold prediction as to where you think tech will be, like your industry will be in about 5 or 10 years. We obviously read a crazy arc in
Yeah.
advancement.
Yeah. So, I mean, right now it's so hard to tell, like 5 or 10 years. I think right now we're already experimenting with. So a lot of the work I've done in the last several years has been how do we give people what I call the appearance of a high touch service with on ramps and off ramps to people as they need them in context and in real time. And we're almost achieving that now. I didn't see the chat GPTs of the world coming in to solve this problem. I could do plenty of, natural language processing and guided dialogue kind of things. So I think let's say that, did you give me up to 10 years? Okay. So let's assume in 5 to 10 quantum computing is a thing. Okay. They've cracked that nut and it's not the size of a football field that needs to be, sub 200 degrees or whatever. So let's assume that's working, in which I think, rate rate of innovation currently, we could probably get quantum down in 5 years. And so in 10 years, I, Siri will work like Apple originally intended it to, right? It will be integrated with everything. The language won't have hallucinations anymore. They'll figure out a way to indicate what is bias. And I think that will transfer in 10 years. So I was just playing before this call with ChatGPT, and can I just speak into it and it'll create my flow diagram for a PowerPoint? And it didn't. It was terrible. Right. I was super excited and then wow, right? I think the stuff now, like I need to book, I need to get my haircut. I will just say, hey, name thing, I need a haircut. And it will look at my schedules and it'll just be like, great, you're scheduled. Like the 10 minutes it took me to click through and my credit card and everything. And we will get rid of cybersecurity hostage holding. That's the other thing that really, really bothers me, is that all these important institutions, hospitals, schools, etc., are being held hostage by ransom things. And I'm hoping we can leverage this technology that will never become a problem ever again.
I love the vision of your future, and I'm looking forward to the journey. That's going to be exciting. Jason, thank you so much for joining Megan and I today on Technically Speaking. All of our viewers at home, thank you guys for joining us. You can always reach out with questions to at technicallyspeakingexpeed@gmail.com. We're also on Spotify now. Thank you, Megan, for getting us up on Spotify, so you can find us both on YouTube and Spotify. Megan, are we anywhere else right now, or just those two?
Just those two. We will eventually get there where we
We're
expand
going to
a
keep growing.
lot.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you all
Yeah.
for your comments. Hopefully this was as educational for you as it was for myself and for Megan. So Jason, thank you so much.
My
Everyone,
pleasure.
we'll
Thanks
see
for
you on
having
the
me.
next one. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.